They drove to the will, reading without telling me. The lawyer refused to start until I arrived. The voicemail came at 9:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, and the reason I know the exact time is because I was in the middle of a work call when my phone buzzed and I glanced at the screen and saw my cousin Bethany's name and let it go to voicemail, which is something I will think about for the rest of my life. Not with guilt exactly, more with this particular quality of awareness, the way certain small decisions reveal themselves later as the exact moment everything changed. I finished the call. I made coffee. I sat down at my kitchen table and played the message. Bethany's voice was careful in the specific way voices get careful when someone is delivering information they know is wrong and have decided to deliver anyway. She said that the family had gathered at the attorney's office that morning for Grandma Rude's will reading. She said she was sorry for the short notice. She said she hoped I understood that things had moved quickly and it had been hard to coordinate. She said the reading was at 10 and she just wanted me to know in case I wanted to come, knowing it was probably too far to make it in time. But she wanted me to have the chance. The attorney's office was 22 minutes from my apartment. She called at 9:47. The reading was at 10. 22 minutes away. I sat at my kitchen table for probably 30 seconds. Then I grabbed my keys. I need to back up because the voicemail doesn't make sense without the map of what came before it. Not the long version. I could give you the long version. I have been carrying the long version for 31 years, and there are whole rooms of it I haven't opened in years. But enough of it that you understand what kind of family I'm talking about, and what kind of granddaughter I was, and what kind of woman my grandmother was, and why any of this matters. My grandmother's name was Ruth Elaine Calloway. She was 83 when she died. She had white hair that she said every Friday at a salon she'd been going to for 40 years, and she wore the same 3 perfumes on rotation depending on the occasion. And she made a lemon pound cake from a recipe she kept in her head and refused to write down because she said if she wrote it down, she'd become replaceable. She was funny. Sharp. Specifically, the kind of funny that comes from paying very close attention to the world and having no patience for pretension. She had opinions about everything from foreign policy to the correct way to load a dishwasher, and she shared them all with equal conviction. She was my person. I want to be plain about that. In a family that was large and loud and perpetually complicated, she was my person in a way that I understood very early and never took for granted. She called me every Sunday at 6. She remembered every detail I'd ever told her. When I was going to my divorce at 28, she drove 4 hours to my apartment and stayed for a week and didn't offer advice unless I asked for it, which is a quality of restraint I have never seen in another human being before or since. She told me once, when I was about 15 and having one of those adolescent crises of belonging that feel like the end of the world, that I was going to be fine. Not in the dismissive way adults say that to teenagers. In the specific, direct, this is a fact way she said everything. She looked at me and said, "You're going to be fine because you're the kind of person who doesn't give up on people, even when they deserve it, and that quality will take you further than you can currently imagine." I wrote it down afterward. It's still in a journal somewhere. Now, let me tell you about the rest of the family, because they are the architecture that makes this story make sense. My mother is Ruth's daughter. She has a sister, my Aunt Carol, and a brother, my Uncle Dennis. Carol and Dennis both live within 40 minutes of where I grew up, which means they were physically present in Ruth's daily life in ways that my mother and I weren't, because we moved when I was 6 for my dad's job and never moved back. That distance became, over the years, a kind of currency. Carol and Dennis had proximity, and they spent it constantly, in small ways and large ones, on the project of positioning themselves as the central family members, the ones who mattered most, the ones who were there. My mother felt it and spent most of my childhood trying to compensate for it by maintaining a careful, slightly effortful closeness with Ruth that required a lot of phone calls and annual visits and birthday packages sent on exactly the right day. I felt it too in a different way. Every summer visit, I could feel the invisible ledger. Who was closest to Grandma, who she spent more time with, whose children she lit up for more visibly. Carol's kids, especially her oldest daughter Bethany, had been raised to understand themselves as the inner circle. I was the cousin from far away who showed up in July and disrupted the usual order of things. Except that Ruth never treated me like I was from far away. That's the thing Carol and Dennis and Bethany could never fully reconcile. No matter how much time they spent in that house, no matter how many dinners and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays they accumulated, Ruth and I had something that proximity couldn't manufacture and distance couldn't erode. She called me every Sunday. She knew my life. She knew me. I think that made certain people very uncomfortable for a very long time. Ruth had a stroke in September. She was at home in the kitchen on a Wednesday morning, and by the time the ambulance arrived, the damage was significant. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks and then moved to a rehabilitation facility. And then, when it became clear that the rehabilitation had limits, moved to a care facility closer to Carol's house. I visited in October. I took a week off work and drove down and sat with her every day. She couldn't talk well by then. The stroke had taken most of the language, which was a particular cruelty for a woman whose sharpness had always lived in her words. But she knew me. Her eyes knew me. She held my hand with the hand that still worked and squeezed it in a rhythm I recognized from 100 conversations. I drove home on a Sunday. She died on a Thursday. I got the call from my mother at 7 in the morning, and I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the particular silence of losing the person who knew you best in the world. The funeral was the following weekend. I went down for it, stayed with my mother, did the things you do, the casseroles, the receiving line, the careful management of grief in public. Carol was everywhere at the funeral, organizing, directing, inserting herself into every conversation, wearing her grief visibly and loudly in a way that I noticed but didn't comment on because grief looks different on different people, and it wasn't the day for analysis. Bethany was by her side the entire time doing the same. Dennis was quieter but present. The family gathered in the way families do, in the way that feels both necessary and slightly performative, and I said goodbye to my grandmother in the ways available to me. The attorney never called me. I want to be precise about this. In the weeks after the funeral, while my mother was handling the estate logistics, she mentioned that the attorney would be in touch about the will reading. I assumed this meant I would receive a direct communication, a letter or a call or an email, because that is how these things work when you are a named party in a will. I waited. Nothing came. I asked my mother twice if she'd heard anything, and she said she was following up. I took that to mean it was being handled. It was being handled, just not in the way I understood. I don't know exactly when the decision was made to hold the reading without me. I don't know who made it. I have theories. I have very specific, detailed theories, but I can't prove them, and naming them here without proof isn't something I'm willing to do. What I know is that on a Tuesday morning in November, the attorney opened his office to my uncle, my aunt, my 3 cousins, and my mother, and not one of them picked up the phone to call me until 9:47, 22 minutes before the thing began, from a location 22 minutes away from my apartment. I drove fast, not recklessly, but with a focus that I think comes from moments where you understand instinctively that something significant is happening and your presence or absence is going to matter in ways you can't fully see yet. I found parking 2 blocks away. I walked into the building, checked the directory, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and pushed open the glass door to the attorney's office at 10:08. The receptionist looked up. I said, "I'm here for the Calloway will reading." She said, "Your name?" I said, "Maura Calloway Brandt." Something happened in her expression, a small rearrangement, something between recognition and relief. She said, "One moment." She got up and went down a short hallway, and I heard a door open. I heard a voice, male, formal, say something I couldn't make out. Then she came back and said, "They're right this way." I followed her down the hall. She opened the door to a conference room, and I walked in. My family was seated around a long table. My mother, Carol, Dennis, Bethany, and 2 of my other cousins. 7 people in total, seated and settled, the unmistakable arrangement of people who have been there for a while and have made themselves comfortable. Every head turned when I came through the door. The expressions were varied. My mother's was complicated and guilty. Carol's was carefully neutral. Bethany's shifted quickly into something overly welcoming. The way people look when they're covering a reaction they don't want you to see. At the head of the table was a man in his 60s in a gray suit who I had never met. He stood up when I entered. He stood up when I entered. He said, "Miss Calloway Brandt, I'm glad you made it." He extended his hand. "I'm Thomas Garrett. I was your grandmother's attorney for the last 22 years. He paused. "I've been waiting to begin." I shook his hand. I said, "I came as quickly as I could." He said, "I know." And the way he said it, direct, with a specific kind of weight, told me that he knew more than the logistics, that he understood exactly what the timing of Bethany's voicemail meant. I looked at him and he looked at me, and something passed between us that I didn't have language for yet but would understand better later. I sat down in the one empty chair which was at the opposite end of the table from Carol. He sat down. He opened the folder in front of him. He said, "Before I begin, I want to note for the record that all named parties are now present. I want to also note that it was your grandmother's specific and documented request that this reading not commence until all named parties had been personally contacted and given adequate time to attend." He looked up from the folder, not at anyone in particular, but the sentence landed in the room the way sentences land when they were designed to land. I apologize for any confusion about the timeline this morning. The office will be reviewing its notification procedures. The office will be reviewing its notification procedures. I watched Carol's jaw tighten. I watched Bethany examine her hands. My mother was looking at the table in the same way she'd been looking at tables my whole life when she didn't want to participate in something she was already part of. He began. The standard items came first: personal belongings, furniture, specific pieces of jewelry allocated to specific people. Carol received the dining room set that had been in the family for 50 years. Dennis received Ruth's car and some tools that had belonged to their father. My mother received the china and a small collection of first edition books that had been Ruth's most prized possessions. Bethany received the lemon pound cake recipe, which Ruth had finally written down and sealed in an envelope with Bethany's name on it, and I watched Bethany's face when that was announced and saw something genuine, real emotion, real love for Ruth. And I want to be honest about that because Bethany is complicated, and so is my relationship with her, but her grief was real, and I'm not going to take that from her. Then Thomas Garrett reached into the folder and produced an envelope. It was different from the documents he'd been working from. Thicker, cream-colored, the specific shade of cream that meant it came from Ruth's personal stationery, which I recognized because she'd been using the same stationery for decades. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, her actual handwriting. Not typed, not printed, written in the slanted, deliberate cursive she'd had since before I was born. He said, "Your grandmother asked that this be read aloud. She prepared it herself approximately 3 weeks before her stroke and left it with me with specific instructions." The room was very quiet. He opened the envelope. He unfolded what was inside. 2 pages I could see, handwritten front and back. He cleared his throat. He read, "I'm not going to give you every word. Some of it is mine in a way I'm not ready to share with the world. Things Ruth said that belong to the private space between a grandmother and a granddaughter and that I want to keep there. But I'll tell you what she said that was meant to be heard by the room. She wrote that she had been watching her family for a long time. She wrote that she had made peace with most of what she saw because she had lived long enough to understand that families are imperfect systems and the only productive response to that is grace. But she wrote that there was one thing she had not made peace with, which was the way certain members of her family treated the fact that she loved her granddaughter Maura. She wrote, and Thomas Garrett read this in the same measured, unswerving tone he'd used for everything else, which made it somehow more devastating, that she was aware of the ways Maura had been excluded over the years. Not specific incidents, just the pattern of it. A long, slow accumulation of being treated as peripheral to a family she was wholly part of. She wrote that she had not intervened in these things during her lifetime as directly as she should have, and that she regretted it, and that she intended to correct the record now because it was the last chance she had. She had left the house to me, not part of it, not a share of it. The house, her house, the house she'd lived in for 41 years, the house all of us had grown up visiting, the house with the kitchen where she made the lemon pound cake from memory, in its entirety to me. She had also established a separate fund, already set up and already funded, designated for my benefit, the amount of which I'm going to keep private because, frankly, it's nobody's business, and the specific number is beside the point anyway. The point was the intent. The point was what she wrote next. She wrote that she knew this would surprise some people in the room, and that she was comfortable with that. She wrote that she had spent her life watching Maura love people who didn't always love her back at the same volume, and that she thought it was time someone made sure Maura knew that she was seen. Those were the exact words Thomas Garrett read from the page. In her voice, in her handwriting, she was seen. She wrote that she hoped the people in the room who had made Maura feel otherwise would take the opportunity to reflect on that. She did not name anyone. She didn't have to. She ended the letter with the same phrase she'd used when she called me every Sunday for my entire adult life. Just 3 words, "I love you." And then her name, full, formal, Ruth Elaine Calloway, signed the way she signed things that mattered. Thomas Garrett folded the letter, slid it back into the cream envelope, and slid the envelope across the table to me. I picked it up. I held it. I did not cry. I had made a decision somewhere between the parking lot and that room that I was not going to cry in front of these people, and I honored it. I sat very still and I held the envelope, and I felt something moving through me that I don't have a clean word for. Something that was grief and gratitude and vindication and exhaustion all at once. A whole weather system compressed into 30 seconds in a conference room on a Tuesday morning. The room was silent. Carol was the first to move. She pushed her chair back slightly, the way people do when they're physically managing an emotion they haven't decided how to express yet. I watched her and I didn't look away, and after a moment she looked back at me and something in her face was different from what I expected. Not anger. not the cold neutrality she'd been wearing. Something older than that. Something that might have been, if I'm being honest, shame. She said, Mara, and then stopped. And then, I didn't know she'd done this. I said, I know. She said, I want you to know that the way this morning was handled, the notification, the timing, I said, Carol, just her name, just to stop the sentence before it turned into an explanation that was really an exoneration. She stopped. I said, I know it was Bethany who called me. I know what time she called. I did the math in the parking lot. I looked at Bethany, who had gone the particular color people go when they've been specifically named for something they hoped would stay general. I don't want to do this here. I don't want to do this today. But I want to be clear that it happened and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Bethany said, I was trying to give you the chance to come. Bethany. Same thing. Just the name. She went quiet. Thomas Garrett was doing a remarkable impression of someone who was simply reviewing documents and not present for any of this. My mother looked at me. Her expression was its own complicated story. Guilt, relief, something that might have been pride, all of it moving across her face in a way she wasn't trying to hide. She said quietly, she talked about you all the time. You know that, right? She talked about you all the time. I looked at my mother. I said, I know, Mom. She nodded. She lifted her hands. We sat in that room for another 20 minutes while Thomas Garrett finished the formalities. The logistics of the house transfer, timelines, next steps, what needed to happen in what order. I wrote things down in the Notes app on my phone with the cream envelope sitting on the table in front of me. Professional. Present. Holding everything in. I held it until I got to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and I put the envelope on the passenger seat and I looked at my name in her handwriting and I let it go. Not loudly. Just quietly, steadily, for a long time, the way you cry when you're grieving and grateful and exhausted simultaneously. And there's no one watching and you don't have to manage it for anyone else. She knew. That's what kept coming back to me. Through all of it, every July visit, every Sunday phone call, every moment I'd felt peripheral and unaccounted for. She had been watching, and she had been carrying it, and she had spent her last clear weeks making sure I would know. She was seen. She'd written, meaning me. She wanted me to know I was seen. She was seen too. I want to say that because it's true and because I never got to say it to her face after I understood the full scope of it. She was seen. I saw her. Every Sunday at 6, every lemon pound cake, every moment she looked at me across a room full of family politics and held my gaze just long enough to let me know I wasn't invisible. I saw all of it. I saw her. That was 7 months ago now. The house transfer was completed in February. I drove down and walked through it for the first time as mine, which is one of the stranger experiences of my life. A place that has always existed in my memory as someone else's becoming yours. All the familiar rooms rearranged by ownership into something new. I have not sold it. I don't think I'm going to. I've been going down on weekends and slowly going through things, which is its own kind of long conversation with a woman I miss enormously. I found the lemon pound cake recipe written out in a second copy, tucked inside a cookbook on the third shelf, with a note in the margin in her handwriting that said simply, for Mora, in case. I cried standing in the kitchen for about 10 minutes and then I took a photo of it and texted it to Bethany. Because whatever is complicated between us, Ruth loved Bethany and wanted her to have the recipe, and I think she should have it. Bethany texted back a voice memo that was mostly crying and the words, thank you, and I listened to it twice and then went back to going through the cookbooks. Carol called me in January. A real call, not a text, which cost her something because Carol is not a person who makes herself vulnerable by phone. She said she wanted to tell me directly that she had known the will reading time and had made a choice not to personally call me and that she was sorry for that. She didn't frame it as a mistake or a communication error. She said she'd made a choice and it was wrong and she was sorry. It was the most honest thing Carol had ever said to me in my entire life, and I didn't know exactly what to do with it, so I just said thank you and that I appreciated the call. We're not close. We weren't before and we aren't now, and I don't think we're going to be, and I've made peace with that. But we're civil in a way that feels like it has weight now, like it's built on something real instead of just surface management. That's more than I had before. My mother and I have talked more in the last 7 months than in the previous 5 years combined. Something about all of it cracked something open between us. Maybe the loss of Ruth, who was the center of gravity for the whole family, or maybe just the Tuesday morning in the conference room. The letter read out loud, the envelope slid across the table. Something shifted. We're figuring out what we are to each other without Ruth as the intermediary. And it's awkward and slow, and I think it's going to be okay. Here's what I know about my grandmother now that I didn't fully understand when she was alive. She was strategic in the way that very loving people sometimes are. She let things play out. She watched and she waited and she moved when the moment was right in a way that would last beyond her, that would do something she hadn't been able to do with her presence. She could have told me while she was alive that she saw what was happening. She could have intervened in real time, made her feelings plain, put pressure on Carol and Dennis to treat me differently. Maybe she should have. I thought about that, but she did something different. She waited until the room was full and the moment was documented and the lawyer's voice was the one delivering it. And she made it undeniable, made it a matter of record, made it something that would sit in that conference room for everyone who was there to carry for the rest of their lives, not as gossip or family legend that can be revised, but as a fact, witnessed and notarized and signed in her own name. Ruth Elaine Calloway. She played the long game. She played it all the way to the end. I think about her on Sundays at 6. I don't call anyone at that time. I just sit with it for a few minutes, let the hour exist the way it always existed. Then I make coffee. Sometimes I make the pound cake, which takes longer than it should because I'm still learning the recipe and she never wrote down the oven temperature, just said, "You'll know when it's ready," which is the most Ruth thing that has ever been said. She was right, it turns out. You do know when it's ready. You know when it's ready and you know what's real and you know who saw you and you carry that and you go forward. That's all you can do.